Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Halftime Talk. We're absolutely thrilled to have our first episode of the year with Mr. Charif Souki, the Executive Chairman of the Board of Tellurian. It needs no introduction for all of the incredible achievements he's made over his career, most notably the founder of Cheniere Energy. And so, Charif, welcome to Halftime Talk.
Sean, thank you very much.
Charif, let's kick off with the sort of rear view mirror reflection coming out of 2020 into the new year. What do you take away from last year? What learnings, what stays with you as we move into this new year?
Well, first and foremost, Sean, patience, because last year, as everywhere, was a difficult year, particularly in the LNG business, but really seriously everywhere. In the energy business, you saw the market cap of most of the companies drop somewhere between 60 and 70%. We were not spared. So everybody had a moment of doubt in March, April, saying, where are we going with this? But then as things start normalizing and start getting back on track, the fundamentals come back and you look at what needs to happen and what is happening, and you can start seeing some trends. So the first thing is natural gas consumption never came down the way oil consumption came down, mostly because...
I mean, oil collapsed about 20 million barrels a day in demand in April, on the average for the year about 10.
Yeah, but when people stay at home, they still need their electricity, they still need their home heating. So there was not the same impact on the gas side. And you could see that as the year progressed, we got back to something very normal. It really never got completely out of kilt. The second thing is there were phenomena that had started a few years before that were starting to materialize. First one is most of the North American LNG production was coming on stream, and America was becoming a very significant player. It was not true in 2019. It became increasingly so in 2020. And as you saw, America responsible for almost 20% of global LNG production, what happens in America became important for what happens in the rest of the world.
And when you look, sorry, go ahead.
And I think the third thing is we've gone through a long phase of underinvesting in the industry in general, but in LNG in particular. So all the projects that have finally arrived were things that were started 7-8 years ago. And now we find ourselves with very little coming in the near future. So the system has been tightening, and we were operating very close to full capacity, which is not sustainable. So you could see the early trends as early as June, and as the year progressed, it became more and more significant. So those are the three big things from 2020.
When you think of a lot of the narrative out of 2020, there is the sense that what existed before, whatever the subject you want to pick, COVID in some way accelerated it forward, digitization or other areas, the climate, the low carbon strategies, the great energy transition. A lot of things seem to have an acceleration through the COVID window. In your space, did you see any acceleration, or there any particular energy subject that you would pay attention to that has had an acceleration forward? For example, we've seen China's import of LNG remain substantially strong. It has actually grown significantly in 2020.
I think when commodity prices are very low and everybody's benefiting from it, people become complacent. So you've seen a lack of reaction from consumers in terms of planning for the future. And at the same time, the environmental concerns have become a lot more strident, and it's easy to do when the cost of the commodity is cheap. But as you're starting to see now, the impact of the lack of investments and the tightening of the market on prices, it is becoming more and more difficult to look at environmental concern in isolation. You now have to talk about energy poverty, energy security, and one added factor that compounds things, pollution in major cities around the world, which is not the same as climate issues. So you have a different set of circumstances now that are dictating the discourse. And our interaction with various counterparties around the world, the order of priority is first, energy poverty. Second, energy security. Third, pollution. And a distant fourth, climate considerations.
Two of the big sort of shocks in the energy space in 2020, one might point to the negative WTI price in April, where it dropped on one particular day to minus $40. The other would be the LNG price that has soared towards the end of the year, which I don't think at least anybody I was speaking with was even remotely forecasting, and we got to somewhere into a plus $40 on the JKM in Asia. How did that happen? Is it going to last?
So, Sean, I've been publishing every week a 2-minute taping for my investors and my constituents at Tellurian. And I've warned of this starting in June. I think the numbers are kind of inevitable. First, because in the US, we're drilling with not enough rigs to maintain production. And because American LNG is now 20% of the mix, what happens in America will impact what happens in the rest of the world. So you started seeing a growth in prices as early as the summer, but everybody was on vacation. So they left, as you say, in June, thinking that American prices were $1.50 or $1.70. European prices were sub $2, and JKM prices were slightly over $2. And they come back in September from vacation, prices had started moving already. And then through the winter, through the fall, it became worse. I think the second part that I was concerned about, but I didn't think it would happen as fast as it did, is that the demand would continue to increase because the natural gas is a fuel of choice for many developing countries. When you hear Prime Minister Modi wanting to take the percentage of gas in his economy from 6% to somewhere between 15 and 25, that's a very, very serious call on natural gas.
For a country of 1.5 billion people.
And it's necessary because of pollution and because the other energy sources are not affordable either. Same thing in China, to an interesting extent, same thing in Europe. Because as demand in Europe is increasing slightly and you need a reliable fuel when the wind is not blowing or the sun is not shining, you see demand in Europe has increased also to the point where it's not just demand for natural gas, it's demand for energy. So what you've seen is carbon pricing in Europe finally get priced at a level that makes sense, $40 a ton. That implies a minimum $5 for gas. So all of these things happen over the last 3 or 4 months.
And when you look at the structural element, I mean, this is not just a rise in LNG prices. This is the rocket to the moon rise in LNG prices. In an oil indexed equation, you're talking upwards of $300 oil price as in the previous pricing structure, 10 or 13% of Brent. So I'm trying to understand from your point of view how unique is the structural dysfunction in the market at the moment that has created now, I think today or yesterday trading at $30 had gone up above 40 on per MBTU. I'm just wondering, is this because of the dislocation, not enough spot, there's too much LNG caught in long-term contracts, and this is just a temporary moment that reflects a dysfunction in the market? What's your analysis?
There is definitely a dysfunction in the market because LNG is in transition from being a point-to-point trade to a commodity trade. You now have 400 million tons, which means at any given time, there are 300 to 400 ships full of LNG somewhere on the water. There is 15 to 20 cargoes offered for sale every day. And on that basis, you look at the business model that makes sense, and a long-term contract does not make sense in a commodity business. And then if you're trying to find a middle point between the buyers and the sellers, and you need a pricing mechanism, you don't quite know what to pick. So
does this moment accelerate the sort of new format of a contract, or will it delay the move away from long term?
My idea at this point is that contracts are now obsolete. You don't have a contract for oil, you don't have a contract for any other commodity, and LNG is just going to become another commodity. So if you want to prevail, you need to be in the top quartile from a cost standpoint. And we're going there. Now, in normal mature commodities, you have a market for the commodity that you can hedge for a certain period of time, not 20 years, but certainly a few years. And we haven't gone to that point yet in the LNG business. We're getting there. JKM is moving very quickly to be able to provide financial instruments. TTF is already in a position to provide financial instruments. So 5 years from today, we will have a business model. Today, we're kind of in limbo land. We're not quite sure how to rationalize the new investments that we want to make.
As we look now at the beginning of this year, 2021, where do you see the role for US LNG exports? Where is its market in the world? There was a sense that Europe was going to be the market for American LNG. Now it might be that China is. I'm just wondering, as you look forward, where do you think the output for LNG out of America goes, and what impact does a sort of lower shale industry have on the availability of gas? If we're down 2 million barrels of oil a day, does that restrict the available associated gas? Generally, where is American LNG exports going?
I would take it in context in full natural gas exports.
Okay.
And if you take the entire market, which is about 350 BCF a day, of that, 100 BCF a day crosses borders. The rest is consumed where it is produced. So if you produce in the US and sell in the US, you don't affect the global markets. If you produce in Russia and consume in Russia, you don't affect the international markets. So out of that 100 BCF, about half is pipeline and half is LNG. America is about 17% of that number. So it has an impact on global prices today. The only place where there is a significant amount of construction going on is in the US, between Golden Pass, 2 trains at Corpus Christi and Sabine Pass, and Venture Global. So there's about 35 million tons under construction now in the United States.
For LNG exports.
For LNG exports. So the role of the US is extremely important in terms of the presence in global trade. The global 70% of the global trade comes from 4 places: Russia, US, Australia, and Qatar. Australia is not in the game anymore because it's too expensive. They have their own issues. So they're not proposing to continue to increase. So the increase in natural gas exported, whether it's in pipeline or in LNG is going to come from three areas. And those three areas will have a very significant impact on what happened to global pricing. And the US is a very significant part of that.
Well, if we look at that part and the new American president coming in tomorrow or today when this interview airs, one of the subjects on the in tray, and I'm not sure how high on the in tray it will be, but is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia into Europe. Which is coming into Germany and a second route, if you like, of gas out of Russia into Germany, the biggest market in Europe. My question is, Charif, how significant is that from the point of view of US LNG finding a home in Europe? And how do you think the new Biden administration should approach this?
Well, far from me the idea of advising any administration on what to do. I'm just a businessman. I'm not a politician, and I've not been asked for my advice. And if I offered any advice, I'm not sure anybody would listen. So,
okay,
from my standpoint, if I were a European, I would think an abundance of options is very important. Now, your options are pretty limited. You have some indigenous gas from Norway and the North Sea. And then the rest of what you need is going to come mostly from two places, Russia or LNG. I would want to have all the options open to me because I'm looking at what is happening now. The carbon prices are higher. It's going to discourage the consumption of coal in the places where it remains. That could increase the demand for natural gas. And on that basis, I want to continue to have affordable resources. So as a European, I would be in favor of Nord Stream 2. Now, geopolitical issues about whether we're trying to punish a certain country or circumvent somebody, that's above my pay grade.
Yeah.
But
in terms of then you will have to make decisions, obviously, based on looking at all of these things. Where do you find a market for your LNG coming out of the US? Does Europe have the capacity to absorb American LNG, or is Asia and China a much more natural destination?
Europe plays a very, very critical role because they have storage, which Asia doesn't have. So for the world to function reasonably well, Europe needs to fill their storage in the summer so that they don't have a crisis in the winter. They've done that very, very efficiently last summer, which is why they came at the beginning of winter with record inventories and why the impact on European buying is mitigated. If they hadn't done this, they would be chasing prices as high as Asian prices this winter. So the world needs to hope that Europe continues to function the way it functioned in 2020. Fill their storage in summer in order not to put too much strain on LNG in winter. And all of this, of course, has been compounded by cold seasons in both Europe and Asia, which has magnified the problem this year.
And again, to the new Biden administration, what are your expectations of the policies that they're indicating for U.S. energy industry? How does the year look like, do you think? Does it impact shale? Does it impact licenses for new exploration, export? How do you see it playing out?
My sense from the people that I know within the Biden administration that I've dealt with when I was a engineer and when they were in the Obama administration is we're dealing with very pragmatic people who understand the issues and the complications. They've been in the business before. They've been in the space before. They've had to make difficult decisions in the past in terms of allowing export of natural gas, allowing export of oil. So these people have been tried and through difficult times. So they have the basis, they have the background to understand all the implications. The ones that I know are extremely smart. They will react very quickly to the new situation. I think the piece they don't have any comfort with yet or any understanding of yet is how important American energy has become to the rest of the world in terms of the geopolitical impact. I think the last time they were involved in this 4 years ago, that was not true. Now it's compounded. Now, all of a sudden, the US is a major player in global energy markets, and particularly in global energy markets.
And what
So
do they
it's
need to understand in terms of policy to get their head around that change?
look, it's very simple. Every time they go to a foreign country, one of the questions they're going to be asked is, can we have your energy? And particularly, can we have your natural gas? What are you going to do? That is going to be front and center in all the conversations they're going to have on a global basis. Now, they want to repair the damage that was done in the last 4 years to international relations. They have to come prepared with, that's one piece of the menu that we have to have under control, that we have to be able to provide responses for.
I mean, it's possible that if you see the Biden policy around more, let's say, more carbon awareness, if you want, in the US, that it may actually leave more fossil fuels available for export if indeed there is greater efficiencies, greater regulations around consumption in America, that it might actually leave more of the available for export. Do you see that, or how do you see that playing out? Tighter regulations at home?
I think the issues are going to be more pressing than this. What you're talking about takes time to implement.
Right.
The first thing they're going to have to contemplate is that natural gas is now 60% more expensive than it was at the beginning of the summer. Naturally, this would imply that you're going to switch from natural gas to coal. Because in power generation, which will be felt this summer, in the winter it doesn't matter much. If you have high gas prices, the natural thing to do is switch back to coal for all the utilities.
But coal has been expensive as well in recent years.
In Europe.
In Europe, okay.
Okay. That would be the first thing they're confronted with, depending on how expensive natural gas becomes in the US this winter. Okay. What do we do about preventing a return of coal and an increase in emissions, especially at the time where we want to join the Paris Accord and we want to go to Glasgow? So those are going to be
Glasgow sort of sits there as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. So those are immediate issues.
Yeah.
So
let's wrap up, Charif, and just talk a little bit about Asia, where all the drama is happening with LNG, and inevitably the price spiked substantially, mainly on the back of sort of tightness in the Japanese market. What's your outlook for Asia this year and for Asian demand and China in particular?
I think Asian demand is going to continue to increase because it is by far the preferred fuel if you can get it at a reasonable price. Okay, so the impact will depend very much on price. At the moment, it doesn't look very good, but it's only been a couple of months. So we'll see where things stabilize. We're going to be out of winter in 2 months, and we'll see where things find their equilibrium. So as long as the price is affordable, demand in Asia will continue to increase very quickly.
I mean, there's already reports that this spike in LNG has derailed some $50 billion worth of investment in new infrastructure for LNG in Asia. And now that might be just a temporary moment, but nonetheless, this elevated price may have legacy impact. What's your own thoughts of what that could be?
I'd be very surprised if that were the case. I think you can forego one of these projects, but you have to come up with an alternative. There's no question that Asia needs the energy in order to continue to take their population out of poverty and into the middle class. So the options are limited.
I suppose the question is, where does the money come from? I was doing an interview the other day with the Bangladesh Minister of Energy. They desperately want more gas, but the money to build, they're doing floating regasification at the moment because they don't have the capital to invest onshore.
Yeah, okay, so Sean, 6 months ago, the numbers didn't pencil. So nobody wanted to do it, and all the buyers were chasing the cheapest possible natural gas, regardless of whether it justified the investment you made or not. So we now have gone, the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction. Now it's prohibitively expensive. There is a middle balance somewhere where you pay the price for natural gas that justify building new projects, whether it's pipelines or liquefaction facilities, in order to justify your needs. So we've gone very, very quickly from one extreme to the other. We need the pendulum to swing back a little bit so that they can afford it. And we need to go and find the resources in the 3 places and anywhere else that is possible, but in Qatar, in Russia, and in the United States, in order to continue to be able to import gas from those 3 places.
Do you see, I mean, there was a sort of a forecast that was going to be a surplus of LNG for a while, but into the 20s, there would start to be tightness. And that's why Qatar is increasing from 77 to over 100 million tons capacity. Where do you see that sort of midterm trend for LNG? Is there excess capacity? Is there tightness coming? What's your own sense?
So the last thing that we had a price signal of this magnitude was in 2014. We were in the process of building 150 million tons of liquefaction capacity over the next 5 years, plus a couple of pipelines, including Nord Stream 1, Turk Stream, the Trans-Siberia, and so on and so forth. This time there's nothing. There's 50 million tons under construction now, and that's it over the next 5 years. So the problem is magnified this time. Somebody's going to have to make some hard decisions and say, we need to continue to build additional natural gas. You're in a situation where you want to avoid coal if you can. You don't really want to go to oil. Nuclear is completely out of the question. You cannot rely on renewables to fill the void for energy consumption on a global basis. It represents today about 3% of global consumption. You can do whatever math you want and take it to 10% or 12% or 15%. It still will not be enough. So
I suppose the outlook for Asian LNG over that horizon, that needs to be a greater investment in infrastructure. Like you said, Europe is the only place that has the storage, no storage, gas storage facilities in Asia, and lacking in onshore regasification. That structure, that infrastructure, you would think has to come in to Asia.
And you've seen Prime Minister Modi making a deliberate move towards building $60 billion of infrastructure in India. You've seen China making some very significant investments. And I haven't seen anything that has changed in those places. The places that the world is going to have to figure out is places like Pakistan and Bangladesh that don't have the money.
And have 180 million people.
Yes.
Serious size economies, and growing at potentially 5 and 6%. Charif, I've saved the easy question for last. What will the average price of JKM be in the year 2021?
Well, I mean, I can take an easy way out and tell you the curve tells you 9.25.
9.25.
That's what the curve tells you.
That's what it's telling. The market is telling us right now.
But I think what I can tell you is it'll be extremely volatile. It'll go up, it'll come down, and it'll be very hard to predict from month to month.
As volatile as we've seen recently, or will that calm down a bit?
That is setting the bar very, very high. But
yeah.
Volatile enough to make most people in the industry not comfortable.
Yeah. Well, not comfortable seems like the status quo of 2020, and we're probably going to have a lot more of it in 2021. But for now, Charif, thank you so much, Charif Souki of Tellurian. Pleasure to have you on Halftime Talk. Thank you for your time all the way from Aspen, Colorado.
Thank you, Sean.